Okay. Good afternoon, evening. See, it's having two small kids will do that to you. I'm Robert Buxton. I do classical piano with commentary, and I'll do maybe a little gospel at the end. And I just want to thank Larkin for having me. Always, I was mentioning earlier, Larkin's not sick of my same stories and jokes and stuff, so thank you for, for putting up. So, to start with, there's coffee and cookies and things. Please go get, I think there's a lot of talk about classical music, why it's not more popular. Because they don't serve food and drinks in the concert. That's all, I think. So please go get some. It's a good thing to do, yeah.
You changed my style. I always offer to turn the pages. But
well, I don't have any pages. It's all. So, but the first piece I'm going to play, as I mentioned, I did some of these pieces here before. I never learned fast enough, but that's just the way my head is, I guess. But I did this here before. I'm going to do the Franz Liszt Piano Concerto No. 1 in E flat without orchestra because I couldn't bring in an orchestra. It's okay. So we just, I'll play some of the orchestra part. Liszt started writing this. He was born in 1811. He started writing this around age 19, but he didn't finish it until he was in his 40s or something. So it just goes to show good things often take time. Sometimes they don't. There's some Mozart pieces, he'd write them in like one day, or Schubert. But sometimes it takes time to really, and I was reading about this, that Liszt was and is, you could say, controversial and probably misunderstood. So I didn't play much Liszt when I was in school, in music school, because a lot of people said, Liszt he was a showman who was not very, didn't have much depth. This is not true. I don't agree with that. He was, if you look at his life, what that's referring to is something that happened in history. This instrument, you see the metal in here, inside right there. That's cast iron. And in the Viennese pianos of Beethoven and Mozart's time, there was no cast iron inside. So Beethoven, you may have heard, he'd break the piano strings when he played. And it's not really his fault. He would just get into the music and he'd play something loud, and the strings would break. But what happened in the 1830s, and it's also the Industrial Revolution, they started making pianos with cast iron frames in London and Paris. And so Paris especially was this hotbed of the piano virtuosos of that time. And because you could play things like really loud and it wouldn't break the piano. So suddenly you have all these people. And Liszt was part of that, but Liszt was so much more than that. Because there's a story, there's a composer named Dreischock. And I don't mean to talk bad or ill of anyone, because I don't know Dreischock's music. But the story goes that Dreischock apparently played so loud that if the newspaper reporter said that if you were in Vienna, you could, and the wind was right, and he was playing in Paris, you could hear him. So Liszt was not that. He was about so much more. Yeah, he did that, and you're going to hear a lot of that thundering virtuosity in this piece. But there's so many other aspects to Liszt. Liszt, for example, was friends with Chopin. Chopin perhaps looked down at him in some way, but it's a different story. But from Chopin, he absorbed the introspection. He learned how to write lyrically. The second movement of this concerto is, it could be a Chopin nocturne. It has that, and Liszt, like Chopin's from Poland originally. And Liszt was Hungarian, although he didn't speak the language. It's a different story. But so he has that side of introspection. Liszt was very religious in a very odd way. He was drawn to Catholicism throughout his life. Several times he tried to become a priest. Didn't really work out. But he was on the one hand drawn to Catholicism, but on the other hand, he was living the life of like a rock star. He was. So this I think in many cases, great people, they have this dissonance in them, you know, and Liszt was definitely a person with contradictions, and there's just so many facets to his life. So anyway, this concerto, it's 4 movements, but they segue into each other. This is, you could call it a cyclical piece. Very unusual, because melodies from the beginning will come back at the end, and it's all just one big, you know, thing. And it's not like a Beethoven concerto or, you know, Haydn concerto. They don't do that. There's one movement, stop, 2 movements, you know. And it's also more improvisational. This is very improvisatory. I hear a few things. It's just my own interpretation. I hear, and it is Memorial Day, and thank you for coming on Memorial Day. So while this concert is not, it's not literally a Memorial Day program, there are a couple things I'm going to play that tie in. And I think there is this maybe Hungarian, independence and nationalism are in his mind here. Because he was born in Hungary, Austro-Hungary. Hungary became a country during his lifetime, and he was kind of part of that. He felt very strong about that. So I feel there's this kind of maybe militaristic, there's a piece Liszt wrote I played called Funerai, which is funeral march. It's dedicated to those who died in the Hungarian Revolution of 1848. There are many similar passages here. There's this kind of almost like a cavalry march or something. So there's that, and then there's the influence of Chopin, maybe grand opera, like that second movement I played. It could be something out of opera. So I think I'm talking too much, but I'm going to play this concerto. It's a little long. It's like 22 minutes, and then a bunch of short pieces, and then. All right, so let's see what happens. Liszt Concerto number 1. Crazy music. Well, I'll actually have one of these. Thanks for the water, by the way. Very, very needed when you play Liszt. So Liszt, it's, did I tell you the story about that? So when he really wanted to become a priest, and this is not meant to poke fun at religion at all, because he was very religious, and genuinely had this. There's photos of him in his old age, and he's wearing the priest's garments, a collar, this clerical collar and everything. So there was a point he was living mostly in the Vatican in his later years, and he was about to be ordained. And there was a piano there, which was, I guess, unfortunate. And so he started to play something, maybe like that second movement, something like very beautiful. And apparently the nuns all fainted. And the cardinal or whoever came and tapped him on the shoulder while he was playing, he said, "This is not going to work. Skedaddle," you know. So it's just, but again, it's not meant to be, because he was really genuinely. Another thing that was funny was about this concerto. You could see this is a radical piece, even for now. It's a radical piece. And at that time, and Liszt had many critics who felt he wasn't classical enough or whatnot. I mean, he's almost like a heavy metal person at some time. And apparently that theme, he put a text to it in German. And I don't know the exact words, I don't speak German, but it's something to the effect of, to the critics, to the newspaper critics, that you cannot understand this, haha. That's what he had in mind when he so, and on that note, the question of humility. Liszt was many things, and he was a great man. He really was. He was philanthropic and everything, but he was not humble. No way. So let's see. Let me have a little water, and then we'll go on to the next. Yeah.
Well, did he start his studies in Vienna, which is just up the river?
Just up the river, yeah, and then his native language was German,
Okay.
even though he was Hungarian, and he studied with Czerny, you know, the guy that wrote those exercises that drive young students crazy. The stuff like, you know, I never practiced those enough. Should have, I guess, because Czerny did a very good job. He said the 11-year-old Franz Liszt came to me and he played like an undisciplined drunk person. That's how he described him. So, and then Liszt ended up in Paris, which was at the time really the center of musical activity. An interesting thing, and let's go back in time a little bit. I don't go chronologically, I'm gonna jump around. I'm gonna play a piece from the 1700s now, Paris. All arrangements. I love doing arrangements because I can pretend to be something I'm not. And so this is Gossec. And Gossec, we don't hear his music that much anymore. He wrote mainly operas, but also symphonies and concertos. Wonderful composer. Knew Mozart, you know, when Mozart would come to Paris, they'd see each other, you know. And I read this thing somewhere that's interesting. We always think about Vienna in the 1700s, but economically and even musically, London and Paris were actually more musical capitals they were thought of than Vienna. It just so happens that you had these geniuses in Vienna, like, you know, Mozart, and none of whom were from Vienna, oddly. The only one was Schubert, but Beethoven ended up in Vienna. I'm not saying that they had a musical life in Vienna, but just interesting that we don't hear much Parisian or British music from the 1700s much now. I don't know why. So this is Gossec, his Gavotte from the opera Rossini. It's often, people often play it on violin, flute. It's a popular selection, and it's a dance because the French need to have dance in their operas. It's like you need to have Texas Pete with your barbecue in North Carolina. You need to have a dance. And can you imagine Wagner having dance in his opera? I mean, but that's the thing. When Wagner's operas came to Paris, the French put dances in there, and he was not happy about that. You can imagine, you know. But so this Gavotte is an arrangement, of course, for piano. I think it's very funny because I hear hiccups in there. You know, you there's, you know, da 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 dum. Yep. It's just funny, but it captures this world. This is right before the French Revolution. The powdered wigs, the courtly manners, which, for better or worse, and probably better, the world was to be gone soon after, forever, you know. So the world of Versailles and all that. So this is Gossec's Gavotte from the opera Rossini. But you can see that's a different world from Liszt. When people say, I don't even know about the word classical music because, well, Liszt, Gossec, it's a different universes we're talking about. So, let's see, time. I'm going to play now another French piece. This is a song originally for voice, but I don't sing in French, so it's an arrangement. Gabriel Fauré's Après un rêve, After a Dream, arranged by the oddball Australian composer Percy Grainger. He was probably kind of a nutcase, but I won't tell you all the stories about him because some of them are not great to tell here. But Percy Grainger, in his early days, he would backpack from one concert to another in Australia with a full camper's, backpack or whatever. And he'd show up to the concert 10 minutes before, put down his pack and just start playing. I mean, he liked physical labor so much that when he took a ship, he lived at the turn of the 20th century, he would beg the crew to let him work in the ship's boiler room, shoveling coal. It's bizarre, So that the original, he's the arranger, the original composer, Fauré, was, it's about 100 years after that Gossec piece, late 1800s. We were talking about Impressionism and Debussy earlier. Fauré is right, to me he's Impressionist. Actually, to me, Fauré and Franck are Impressionist composers and Debussy and Ravel are modern. But he's right getting to maybe late Romantic, early Impressionism. Because you have all the feeling of color in his music, these effects like that, which are very French, maybe you could say. It sounds like it's like the sauce and the food. They like, see, I'm hungry, I guess. It's just, it's very, very French. I don't know, it has that feeling to it. So here is, that wouldn't go in a research paper. Yeah, it's very So here's Gabriel Fauré's After a Dream, which I experienced in real life the other day when our smoke detectors kept going off every hour at night. And it was really after a dream each hour. So that feeling, and I think that's what the piece is going for, that slightly groggy feeling you have when you wake up. It's a little bit in between sleep and wakefulness. Anyway, here it is. could picture a Monet painting maybe, early Monet, early, Impressionism. So let's see. Now I'll do another Percy Grainger arrangement. This is his version, a classical piano version of "Oh Danny Boy," Londonderry Air. And this definitely fits with the theme of Memorial Day because, well, it's an Irish folk tune, and the text, there are different versions of the text. It's probably a father speaking to his son who's going to fight in the Great War, the First World War. It might be. There's other versions, or it could be a mother speaking. There's also a gospel text to it. He looked beyond my fault. But that's at least what I know. I may be wrong, but that's what I've heard. It has this kind of war theme to it. So, but I'm not going to sing it. I'm just going to play the piano version by Percy Grainger. So, familiar melody in an unfamiliar setting, you could say. So, here it is. Play a short Rachmaninoff piece. This is called Margaritsky, or Daisies in Russian, Margarit. And it's a song for voice and piano he wrote in 1916. And shortly after, arranged it for solo piano. That's what I'm going to do. And people play it on violin, on cello, and everything, because it's a beautiful melody and it works for other media. So, Rachmaninoff was probably, I don't want to speculate here, but he probably had what we would today call clinical depression. It showed up at different points in his life. And he was deeply indebted to nostalgia, especially when he came to America, because he left after the Russian Revolution. Interestingly, he was an aristocrat by his lineage, but he didn't grow up in any kind of privilege, really. His father gambled away all the family's money when he was young, so, but the communist revolution, you know, that he wasn't gonna be fitting in with that new world. So he came first to Western Europe, then to America, settling in Beverly Hills of all places. But very, he was so nostalgic, he didn't even learn English. He could say a few words, but he had Russian friends. His home in Beverly Hills, I read, was an exact replica of his house in Russia. He was so, you know, and even the fact that he wrote this piece, he was still in Russia, but I think it's nostalgic for his childhood. This is my interpretation. The daisies, we have some, I don't know if those aren't daisies, but flowers there. Maybe, no, they're not. So, it's okay. Rachmaninoff, some of his happiest memories were spending the summers with his grandmother in the countryside near Novgorod. And I think that's what this piece is about for me. Wide open fields with daisy flowers. My mom's from Russia, you know, and she talks about it all the time. She hasn't gone back since 1980 when she immigrated. And she says that in Russia you have these wide meadows, wide open space. I said, kind of like America, right? She said, yeah, actually, you're right. There's a theory, it's very interesting, that the melodies of Viennese composers are shorter, like, or, you know, because people live closer together there. I mean, this is a kind of out there theory, but it's interesting. But in Russian music, I mean, what's a good melody of Rachmaninoff's? Like, I haven't played it. It keeps going. It just goes on and on and on, like those open, wide open spaces. This piece is no exception. So here is Rachmaninoff's Daisies. I share this, you know, I played it now, I had this memory myself, speaking of memory, you know. So I had an uncle, my mom's brother, named Boris, very Russian. He was, like many of that generation, he was born in 1940. He didn't quite acclimate to America completely ever, and he was very Russian, you know. But I was very close to him. I didn't feel he was out of place in America, but other people did. But anyway, I remember I was playing some Rachmaninoff for him once, and he said, "Yeah, you're playing the notes right, but it doesn't speak Russian yet."
Oh.
And that I actually don't speak Russian a little bit. I'm trying to learn. I have to because it's kind of a shame, you know. But being half Russian, but I just remembered that, and that's what it is, I think. So I'm trying to get there. Hopefully, he died recently, so he's on my mind a lot. Let's see. Now I'm going to play another French piece. Just checking the time. So I have a little plan here. I have a bombastic piece in the beginning, some more mellow things, and then I'll close with another Liszt bombastic thing. So, and then some gospel. So this is something I've just thrown together recently, relatively. And this is the famous Meditation from Thais by Massenet. That's what I was warming up on. And this is usually played on the violin with either piano or orchestra. And there's a violin version of this. And this is the thing, I'm pretending to be a violinist. I love the violin, but my wife convinced me it was not worth the trouble to switch instruments. I told you that. So my plan B is to play all this violin music on the piano, and this is one of them. So, Meditation from Thais. Thais is an opera which is not done very much. I haven't seen it yet. I should, on YouTube maybe. And the story's kind of unusual. Thais is it takes place in Alexandria, Egypt, at the end of the Roman Empire times. And she was a courtesan or something. She worshipped Venus, and she was, you know. And there was an early Christian monk who tries to convert her. In the process, possibly falls in love with her, etc. So it's opera, you know, it's opera. But nevertheless, a lot of people say that the opera has a sort of religious overtone to it. But anyway. This is an interlude from that opera. It's played on a solo violin in the opera. It's not sung. So let's see. It's just kind of a new piece for me. So we'll see.
That's your arrangement?
No, I found it online, so I did add a few little things, but I have a funny story about that. Because I didn't know that, I keep finding these versions of violin pieces for solo piano, and it keeps me being a pretend violinist for longer and longer and longer.
I think it's beautiful, no?
Well, I think it is, but I played this recently somewhere, and a lady came up to me and she said, you know, on second thought, I much prefer it on the violin. I said, well, thanks for coming. No, but she was very nice, very friendly, and perhaps she's right, because the piano can only do so much. Violin, you know, a violin can sound like a human voice maybe, or the cello especially with this. I tried playing cello in elementary school. I grew up in New Jersey, and I had this cello in a soft case. It was a school cello. I really wanted to be a cellist, not a pianist, and it was an icy day, and I was walking on the ice, and I saw my friend, I waved, and I fell backwards. I was fine, but the cello was not. And so that was the end of my cello endeavors. It's kind of sad. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to play another Liszt piece. I've done a lot of the Paganini arrangements of Liszt. This is a new one for me. This is the 6th and final Liszt arrangement of Paganini from the set of 6 Grande Etudes de Paganini. And this one is based on the 24th Caprice for solo violin. It's a theme and variations. And this is a famous theme and variations that many composers, Brahms, Rachmaninoff, have, even Ludosławski, a 20th century Polish composer, they have adapted this in their own music because it's such a great, you know, theme and variations. So Paganini was this very controversial violinist, late 1700s, early 1800s. Many thought he was possessed because even the way he looked, the way he played the violin, the music he wrote, it was very controversial, wild. And if you can imagine the world of Gossec and Mozart, and then Paganini comes into it, you know, that's La Campanella, it's another one I've done here before. And he just, it was so much the opposite of that classical world. But the Romantics saw a hero in Paganini, and Beethoven too. And especially Liszt. Young Liszt heard Paganini. Liszt was actually quite depressed at this time. And Paganini he just, you know, blew him out of the water. He just couldn't believe it. And he locked himself up in a room to practice this incessantly for a few years. And in this period, Liszt arranged some of his violin music for piano. He wanted to translate the virtuosity of Paganini into the piano from the violin. So I'm playing, it's funny, so Liszt did a version in the 1830s, then he revised it in the 1850s. At the turn of the 20th century, an Italian composer, Ferruccio Busoni, I love saying it, Ferruccio Busoni, you know, he made his own version of these, and that's what I'm playing now. I'm playing Busoni's version of Liszt's version of Paganini. It's a mouthful, sorry. So anyway, this is the theme, maybe you've heard it before. It's a famous theme of variations, ubiquitously. So this is the Liszt Busoni version of that 24th Caprice for solo violin originally. So here it is. So you can see why Paganini was controversial at that time. I mean, so I'm going to close with a couple Southern Gospel improvisations. First is What a Friend We Have in Jesus, in a slow country gospel way with some improv. You might not play this in a church service exactly this way. Well, I did yesterday in one, and they seemed to be okay with it. So, but the story behind this hymn is the guy who wrote it, Scriven, Joseph Scriven. He wrote it for his mother as the poem, and he was living in Canada. That was in 1850 something, and she was living in Ireland, and they missed each other a lot. So he sent this poem, "What a Friend We Have in Jesus," to comfort her, and it's really timeless if you think about it. So here it is. I'll play one very quick thing if that's okay, just one really quick thing, okay. I'm gonna try to do When the Saints Go Marching in this, yeah, in the style of Mahalia Jackson. All right, so real quick, it's not very long, so, here it is. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't look. Thank you, I overstayed.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Thank you so much, Larkin and everyone, for having me, and have a wonderful rest of your Memorial Day. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm gonna be annoying for a second. I spent an hour trying to get the 2023 PBS Memorial Day